Good evening. My name is Len Foy, and I am a real estate attorney in Nashua, New Hampshire. It is Thursday, May 12th, and I am making yet another video production for the benefit of my clients and various people who may be interested in retaining my services or consulting with my firm. I consider the video that I'm making tonight to be almost a public service announcement. I think it has that kind of currency and that kind of relevancy and that kind of importance to our real estate economy and what's happening with real estate, which I think should be the very essence of these videos. I think people that make videos like this, I know I make them, I know a lot of other practitioners make them, should be speaking directly to issues which are relevant to our real estate economy. So I'm also going to focus on brevity tonight because I think that I've made a number of very lengthy videos which are incredible, and I encourage people to go back and watch them because I think you can learn a lot from them. But tonight I really am going to try to be very bulleted and very targeted and focus on brevity and density and the quality of the information that I'm trying to impart. And I'm going to try not to ramble, which is difficult for attorneys and difficult, I think, sometimes for myself. I've actually gone back and watched a lot of my videos, and it's a little scary to see how old I look in some of these videos. So I'm not sure what to say about that because I feel that I'm very youthful, a very youthful 48-year-old person, and yet I think in some of these videos I look a little bit old, and I think that's probably because I'm typically making them at the end of the day, and I think I probably should be making these videos either at the beginning of the day or on the weekends because I'll probably look a little fresher and a little crisper. So I just include that advisory, and I would say don't let my appearance deceive you. I'm not as old as I look. Having said that, my name is Len Foy, and again, I'm a real estate attorney in Nashua, New Hampshire. And the purpose of this video tonight, or I should say the subject matter of this video tonight, is going to be fraud and how fraud is putting our real estate transactions at risk. And I really feel that even if you are not in the real estate business, there are lessons to be learned from what I'm about to discuss, because this is something that's very real and it has become a part of the landscape, and it's very scary and it's very destructive. So let me just initially talk a little bit about fraud. Unfortunately, fraud has been a part of our real estate conveyancing system for as long as we've been conveying real estate, going back to the days of Abraham Lincoln and even before. And of course, back then, the classic scenario in terms of real estate fraud was the individual who attempted to convey the same piece of real estate to multiple parties. So they would take a piece of property and they would sell it to person A and person B and person C. They would collect the proceeds from each party and then let them fight it out. And those kinds of activities resulted in the advent of title insurance and a legal system which in many ways can sort out these kinds of disputes. And then of course, throughout our history, we've had instances, other types of fraud which have affected our real estate economy. We've had mortgage fraud. We've had fraud with respect to short sales. We've had fraud with respect to foreclosures, foreclosure rescue schemes, a classic type of fraud. We've had fraud in terms of the documentation which has been submitted in connection with the mortgage application process, people applying with phony social security numbers. We've had fraudulent schemes involving straw buyers where transactions are almost imaginary. They're created on paper to induce banks to make loans using artificial buyers and artificial appraisals. So unfortunately, fraud is just a part of the landscape, I think, in every Western industrialized country where we have free market economies, and people are in many cases on their honor to conduct themselves appropriately and do the right thing. And of course, the freedom to do the right thing carries with it the freedom to do the wrong thing, which of course is criminal and is punishable. But nevertheless, when you have a free market economy, you will periodically attract criminal activity, which is unfortunate. But the fraud that I want to discuss tonight isn't the classic bank fraud or fraud involving social security numbers or fraudulent documents or foreclosure rescue schemes. The type of fraud that I want to discuss tonight, which is so dangerous, and it's actually not just a threat to real estate practitioners, it's really a threat to the entire United States economy, is the advent of what I would call wire fraud, wire transfer fraud. I've seen it referred to as social engineering. There's really a number of descriptions of it and for it, but rather than try to attach a label to it, I'd like to explain the scenario to people watching this video, and I'll leave it to someone else more educated than myself to come up with some fancy label for it. But it goes like this, and I can tell you that many attorneys and title companies in the Northeast and really throughout the United States have already been victims of it. I have, due to my prudence and my cautious nature and my, at times, skeptical nature, I have not been a victim of it, but there was an attempt made against my firm involving this very scheme, and it's real. And I've read articles in the Wall Street Journal and elsewhere about the different companies in the United States which unfortunately have been victims of schemes like this. So this is how the scheme works. We had a real estate transaction. Well, I'll deal with a hypothetical transaction. I think that's probably a better idea. But in a hypothetical transaction, the scam might go something like this. A real estate transaction occurs. Let's say I'm handling the closing. I have an understanding with the seller of the property in the transaction that I'm handling that I'm going to be wiring proceeds to him or her following the closing. And so for those of you watching this video who aren't educated about real estate closings and how they work, in a standard real estate transaction involving a piece of property, a residential property oftentimes, the buyer will bring certified funds to the closing. The seller of the property, if they're receiving any money, will receive their money by way of either a check, in some cases a certified check, or a wire transfer. 20 years ago, it was very common for sellers to receive their funds in the form of a check. And wire transfers were very rare, and you didn't see them. But with the pace of innovation and technology and the sophistication of our banking system and the sophistication, frankly, of customers of banks, it's now more common for sellers to request that their funds be wired. So in a classic scenario of this hypothetical closing, the closing attorney would have an understanding with the seller before the closing as to how the seller is going to receive their money, whether they're going to receive their money by way of a check or a wire transfer. Let's just say for the purposes of our example, to illustrate the point, that this particular seller requests a check. So I go to the closing as the closing attorney, I conduct the closing, all the documents are signed, and at the end of the closing I hand the seller their check, his or her check, or their check, as the case may be. I get back to my office and I have an email. And this email purports to be from the seller, who I just met with 30 minutes or an hour beforehand. The email address appears to be from the seller, or maybe the email is from the seller's real estate agent, and that email address appears to be authentic. When I say appears to be authentic, I'll clarify that point in a little while. And this email goes something like this. It was nice meeting you at the closing. You did a wonderful job. Thank you very much. Upon further consideration, I've decided that I would prefer to have my funds wired instead of the check that you gave me. Please put a stop payment on the check. That's totally fine. Assess any fees associated with doing that to me. That also is fine. Please wire my funds to this account instead. Now, as an experienced real estate attorney and an attorney who plays by the rules and who observes the rules, I know that I am not supposed to wire money to anyone other than the seller in a real estate transaction. And this scheme frequently requests that the funds be wired to a business account or a corporate account. And the email will often say something like, my accountant has advised me that these monies should actually be deposited into my business account, and it's often for tax reasons or tax purposes. This is all made up. But that would be a deal breaker for me as an experienced real estate practitioner, because I know that if John Q. Citizen or Jane Q. Citizen is the seller of a piece of property, I know that I am not supposed to wire the money to their business account or their friend's account or their mother's account or their brother's account or the Red Cross, or I'm supposed to wire the money to them, or I'm supposed to give them a check made payable to them, so that I can prove to auditors and the people to whom I have to answer that there's a paper trail and there's a money trail. The property was owned by this person, it was sold by this person, and the funds were delivered to this person. And I can show that continuity in that chain. So I know, and I knew before this scam even became popular, that to send the money to a business account or a corporate account was a no-no. And I wouldn't have done it then, and I wouldn't do it now. But unfortunately, in the fast-paced world of real estate, people periodically take shortcuts. People are convinced of the righteousness of something, like, well, yeah, I know I'm supposed to send the money to them, but they're telling me to send it to their corporate account, and they're claiming that their accountant has directed them to do that. So there's an accountant who's weighing in on this decision. Sometimes these people will claim that their attorney has asked that the money be delivered to a business account. So an attorney's role in this situation is invoked, falsely, but nonetheless invoked. These scams are frequently perpetrated on Fridays. They're frequently perpetrated on the Friday before a major holiday weekend. The people that perpetrate these scams know that real estate attorneys are busy, that they're overworked, that they don't have time to do due diligence, that all of that is worse on Fridays, that it's 10 times worse on the Friday before a holiday weekend. So they caught our industry off guard. But just to finish the hypothetical. So I've done the closing, I've given the check to the seller, I come back to my office and I have an email from the seller, supposedly, asking that their funds be wired. So I pick up what do I do? What should you do if you're in my shoes in this situation? Pick up the phone and call the seller. At the number that you already have for the seller in the file. If there was a number in the email could be fraudulent, disregard it. Call the seller directly. And in the instances that I'm personally familiar with, the seller says, I never sent an email, I never requested that my money be wired, I have your check, I'm going to deposit your check. In other cases, the seller has given the attorney wiring instructions, and the fraudulent email is for the purpose of altering the wiring instructions. Dear attorney, I know that I asked you to wire that money into this account. I'm sending you this email and I'm asking you to wire it to this other account. Okay. And what has happened in our industry? Many attorneys and title companies have fallen for this ploy. They've wired these funds to these other recipients pursuant to these other wiring instructions, only to receive a horrifying phone call a few days later or a week later from the real seller, wondering why they didn't get their wire, why they didn't get their check, why is there a stop payment on their check? And then it's revealed that it was a scam and that the wiring instructions that were sent over were fraudulent. When the email addresses are scrutinized more carefully, it becomes clear that they're also fraudulent. So the seller may have been John Q. Citizen. The seller's email, the legitimate email in the file, might have been johnqcitizen@yahoo.com. When you look at the email with the fraudulent wiring instructions, it's johnqcitizen123@gmail.com or something like that. So when you look at it carefully, when you scrutinize it, you realize that it's not consistent with the email that you have on file for the seller. But it's so similar that to the untrained eye or to someone who's rushing, the differences are so minute they might not be immediately apparent. I've heard of other scams, and most of these are a matter of public record. There was a company in Arizona. They received an email. This was a company, a manufacturing company. They made machinery. They used raw materials from Europe to build this machinery. They received an email from their supplier in Europe saying, please pay my invoice. Here's the wiring instructions. So the director of this firm in Arizona wired $100,000 to the broker for the materials, the cost of the materials. A week later, as you can imagine, if you're following this, the company in Arizona receives an email, of course, from the real broker saying, hey, you're a couple weeks behind on payment. Can you please pay this invoice? The company in Arizona makes the phone call and says, we just paid the invoice, and the broker says, you didn't pay me. But last example, another article that I read in the Wall Street Journal involving, I think, it might have been involving Caterpillar or a construction equipment company based out of Denver. They received a funds request, a wire request from a subsidiary in Florida, asking for $110,000 or something to that effect. The person in Colorado prudently makes a phone call down to Florida and basically says in the phone call, hey, you can have the money. I'm not calling to challenge your request for the money. I have to basically just make some notes as to what you need it for. And of course, the subsidiary in Florida said, I haven't requested any money. And upon further inspection, they determined that the wiring instructions in the initial email were fraudulent. So how is it happening? Well, here's how it's happening. Before we get to how's it happening, that'll take a second. Let's finish this discussion by a few more points. And this is information that I've heard through the grapevine, as it were. I haven't spoken to anybody who this has happened to firsthand, and there's a reason for that. The attorneys and title companies in this industry who have been victims of this scheme obviously feel a certain amount of shame and embarrassment. They don't want people to know that it's happened to them. They don't want people to know that they were tricked. They don't want people to know that they have lost significant sums of money. They just don't want that kind of thing to be in the public domain. So most of the victims of this scheme have not gone public about their situations and experiences, but they've confided in various people, and the word has spread throughout our industry. And now the word is spreading throughout our industry in the form of alerts and bulletins. Where's this money going? Here's how the scam works. When the attorney or title company wires the money to the fraudulent account, that account is actually a domestic account. That's not an international wire. International wires are a big deal. They get a ton of scrutiny. I don't do them. Most attorneys don't do them. I think I've only done one international wire in my life, and it was to Canada, and that's not really an international wire because of our relationship with Canada and the treaties that exist. If I send a wire to Canada and it's wrong, I can recall that wire. In the course of my professional life, I've sent thousands of wires. Maybe I've sent tens of thousands of wires. I don't know. But I don't do a lot of international wires. But the trick of a wire transfer is the finality of it. Under certain circumstances, you can recall a wire. In a friendly situation, a wire that is sent erroneously will be returned. These are the kinds of things that have not happened to me out of an abundance of caution and prudence, and because I'm very careful with wire transfers. Because I know that if I wire money to the wrong person, or I wire the wrong amount to the right person, that I could sink my firm, potentially. Because what you'll find as you get deeper into this is that there's not a lot of insurance money lying around to cover these kinds of problems. So, but in the situations that I have some familiarity with, in that I've heard about what's happened to other people who have been victims of this scam, the money is sent to a domestic account. That account is being monitored closely by people overseas. As soon as the wire transfer hits that domestic account, the money is immediately withdrawn and transferred overseas to banks in Turkey, Cyprus, Ghana, Russia, you name it. Countries where you have no shot of getting that money back. You call the FBI, in many cases, they won't touch it. It's 100,000, 200,000, 300,000. FBI basically takes the position, if it's 5 million, call us. Maybe we have somebody over in Istanbul or someplace like that we can put on it. But there's not a ton of energy for them to solve a crime like this, because basically they acknowledge what most of us acknowledge. This money is gone forever. I mean, there are ways to get it back, and of course you can always file a lawsuit against the bank or some other party in the mix, but that's a lawsuit that could take years to resolve. Your opportunity to get this money back quickly is, I would say it's limited, but limited is too optimistic. It's less than limited. If you call as an attorney or a title company, if you call your malpractice company to try to get coverage, insurance coverage for a thing like this, there usually isn't coverage. Because from an attorney's perspective, it's not the practice of law. If somebody walks into my office and they trick me into giving them $100,000, I can't get that money back from my insurance company. That's not practicing law. Errors and omissions insurance, malpractice insurance, is really for liability incurred in connection with the practice of law or the performance of legal activities. And that's quite broad. And I'm sure a clever attorney can make the case, or try to make the case, that my sending a wire in connection with a real estate transaction, even if I've sent the wrong amount, or I sent it to the wrong person, or I was tricked into sending it to criminals overseas, I'm sure a clever attorney could make the case, or try to, that somehow is an extension of my practice of law. But again, that's a lawsuit that could take years to resolve. And I think it's fair to say that you're not going to get 100 cents on the dollar. So if you wire $100,000 to Ghana and you wind up chasing your malpractice carrier through the legal system as an attorney, I don't know much about the outcome of that case because it's very hypothetical, but it seems to me at the end of the day, if you settle, you're going to get half or less. And the attorney and the insurance company is going to be like, take it or leave it. So, and that's not even taking into consideration the years of aggravation and attorney's fees. So attorneys and title companies cannot allow themselves to be victims of this scam. And I would say, if you're watching this video and you're ever in a position to wire money, here's how you protect yourself. And this is what the bulletins and the alerts are saying, and this is what I do. First of all, my policy is we don't do wire transfers anymore. If I have to wire a payoff, we'll wire a payoff. If I have to send a wire to another attorney because the people who are selling are doing another closing, and it's an attorney that I know and trust and who I can speak to on the telephone, I will. But the days of me just wiring money to sellers willy-nilly, those days are over. It would require days, if not weeks, of due diligence. And there's still a risk that I could be wiring money to the wrong person. So I just give them a check. And they can take that check and they can cash it, they can deposit it, they can do whatever they want with it. It is the safest way for sellers of real estate to get their money. How do these scams take place? Easy. They take place by people in the chain of the real estate transaction being hacked. So what happens is either a buyer or a seller or a realtor will be hacked. The hackers now have access to all their emails. So they can see that, oh, this person's selling real estate. Oh, there are the documents that have been sent by the closing attorney. Those documents tell me when the closing is. They tell me how much money they're getting back. Tells me where the closing is. So that the hacker then has, the hacker then has two advantages. First, they have the advantage of having all this information. So they can reach out to the closing attorney and say, it was nice seeing you at the closing today, which was at 1 o'clock at the Registry of Deeds. You did a wonderful job. This is the seller writing. Just wanted to let you know that I've decided to have you wire my money. So please put a stop payment on my check. I haven't cashed it yet. You can wire the money to me at these wiring instructions. That information seems authentic to the recipient of the email. It makes the recipient think, oh, this is from the seller, because they know so much about this transaction. That's the first advantage. The second advantage is that if you try to do your due diligence through an email, like you respond to the email to ask questions or to try to dig, because the hacker has taken control of that email, they can not only control the response to your email, so they can essentially control your due diligence, but they can also intercept other emails if they see that you're trying to email other people. So if they see that you're emailing the seller and you're emailing the seller's agent, they can then basically start sending emails to the person conducting the due diligence and the seller's agent using false email addresses, basically saying, oh yeah, that's all set, you don't need to respond to that email, or I've already given them everything they need, you don't have to worry about that. They really caught our industry off guard because prior to this scourge, which is what it is, we had a very relaxed and trusting real estate community where significant wires, $300,000, $400,000 and more, was being wired on the strength of an email, a phone call. That trust has been shattered appropriately, and now everybody has their guard up appropriately, and thankfully everyone is now in a more, there's more vigilance, maybe paranoia, and maybe paranoia is always where I've been. I think that's always been my speed. I'm very paranoid about fraud. I'm very paranoid about trickery. I'm very paranoid about mischief. I'm very paranoid about doing something or being tricked into doing something which could destroy my firm. This firm not only supports my family, it supports the family of every man and woman who works in this firm. There's a lot riding on our continuing in business. I can't just wire $300,000 to somebody in Turkey. And so I have always viewed wire transfers and anything financial with a great deal of vigilance and skepticism, and due diligence has always been my rule of thumb. So the money goes overseas. The FBI won't investigate because to them it's small potatoes. And if you go to your errors and omissions insurance company, they basically tell you to pound sand because it's not the practice of law. You sent money to the wrong person. It's on you. It's your fault. It's your responsibility. You're going to have to take care of it. And so a lot of these attorneys and title companies, unfortunately, have had to dig into their own pockets to cover these losses. Here's what I will leave you with. We have, unfortunately, and this is where I get into my social commentary, which may be unwelcome, and if it's unwelcome, then fast forward through this part. We have become a society, in my opinion, that is becoming overly reliant on emailing and texting. When I was a kid, and I know when you start a sentence that way, most people run away from you screaming. But when I was a kid, there were really only two ways to communicate. I heard stories of people writing letters to each other, and I wrote a great deal of letters growing up. But even back then, letter writing was a lost art, and I heard a lot of older people, my elders, if you will, complaining that letter writing was going out of style or had gone out of style. So that really left you with only two alternatives. You could talk to somebody on the telephone, which usually involved actually standing up next to a phone, which was connected to the wall by a cord, and you would have a conversation with somebody, and it would typically be a brief conversation. If it was a lengthy conversation, you would pull up a chair and you would be sitting next to a phone, or you would talk to people face to face. And those really were your options. And so I think we were all very gifted at the art of communication. Certainly people were shy. There were people that certainly were not comfortable communicating face to face, and those people probably opted for more conversation by telephone. But those really were your choices. You could not send people emails as a substitute for verbal communication. And unfortunately, in my opinion, and it is unfortunate, that's where we're headed as a society. So I see people that are prolific texters and they're prolific emailers, but they do not know how to conduct a verbal conversation with people face to face. It's not a comfortable medium for them. And that's because we've all, the younger generation especially, has become dependent on texting and emailing. The hackers are counting on that. They're counting on people relying on email conversations to make critical decisions and not to, I'm going to do a little bit of a dog and pony show here, if you can still see me, and not to pick up the phone and call somebody and say, hey, somebody, did you send me that email asking me to wire that money to you? Was it really you that sent me that email? That's not how my phone calls go. But whenever I get an email from somebody asking me to send money, trying to alter wiring instructions, what I know I'm supposed to do and what you should do if you get an email like this is pick up the phone and call the person who allegedly sent you that email. And then when you've got that person on the phone, try to do some due diligence. Hey, you've given me a new account to send the money to. Tell me what the last 4 digits of that account number are. Make a couple of phone calls. Use external sources to get the information. So if somebody sends you an email and says, well, I want you to wire the money to this address, if you have any questions, call me at this number. You may not want to call them at that number. You may want to find their number on the internet or consult your file. You've dealt with these people. If you've dealt with these people, you have their contact information. They provided it to you. Refer back to it. It's for this reason that I don't do wire transfers any longer. Because to do the kind of due diligence that I really need to do, and to do it right, would take hours. I mean, it could take hours to go back to the file, confirm the phone number, call the phone number, speak with them. Unfortunately, I don't come to work every day to do due diligence on wire transfers to sellers of real estate. That's not my function. That's a byproduct of the closing process. But it's not why we do closings. It's just how we get money to sellers. And it's just as easy to give a seller a check as it is to wire them the money, and frankly, it's safer. And if you are the seller of real estate and you are watching this video, beware. Beware that if you are accepting money by any means other than having an attorney or a title agent hand you a check, you are putting your proceeds at risk in some way. So a lot of my videos are very fun and very upbeat, and I'm all smiles and I'm all happy, but I can't help but bring a sense of gravity to this video and this subject matter, because I have heard of very smart and very good and very nice attorneys being victimized by it, so that when the dust settles and the smoke clears, they have basically taken $100,000 out of their savings and they've given it to some criminal overseas that's going to use that money for who knows what. Maybe terrorism, maybe the drug trade, who knows. So it's wrong on so many levels. In America, we work so hard for our money. And there are people overseas that they're sitting in internet cafes, siphoning off our riches, siphoning off our wealth, siphoning off the fruits of our labor, because we're not vigilant enough, we're not careful enough, we're completely reliant on texts and emails, we're reluctant to pick up the phone, it's uncomfortable to speak to people. I won't single anybody out, of course, I don't want to insult anybody, but I've seen real estate agents on the internet putting in their ads that this is my phone number, but I prefer if you text me. You know, I get it. Texts are more manageable. It's a way to manage communications. And texts are like a wonderful thing in some ways, and in my opinion, they're awful in many ways. Because, well, this isn't a video on texting and the negative side effects of texting, so I probably shouldn't get off on any tangents here. But I just think that it's very odd for somebody to say that this is my phone number, but I would prefer if you send me a text. I think I would be very uncomfortable working with a realtor who wasn't comfortable speaking with me on the telephone, even if only for a few minutes. I'm not looking to monopolize anybody's time or have a 10-hour discussion of, War and Peace. I'm talking about a 5-minute conversation, and I'm not going to get a real feeling about a person if I send a text. But these criminals overseas are banking on this sort of cultural change that we're experiencing in this country, where people are becoming overly reliant on texts and email communications and increasingly uncomfortable dealing in face-to-face situations or even on the telephone. And the saddest piece of that dilemma, what I'm starting to encounter, is people who are incapable of communicating on the telephone and people who are incapable of communicating in a face-to-face setting because they have become so dependent on sending emails and texts to communicate all things, important, mundane, unimportant, you name it, so that when the time comes to sit down and have a conversation about something, a conversation like any story that's got a beginning and a middle and an end, they can't do it. They can't do it. And these hackers, these monsters overseas, have identified this Achilles heel in our system, this fact that we're all sitting around sending each other emails, and not just about like the weather or what are you doing this weekend, but emails about wiring like hundreds of thousands of dollars. They've spotted it and they've exploited it, and they have siphoned off. I saw an article, I don't want to start throwing numbers around, but I saw an article again in the Wall Street Journal. It's hundreds of millions of dollars in losses. And that's what it is too, it's just losses. Because there's no insurance company stepping up to say, hey, all of you people that have sent all that money overseas due to trickery and fraud and deceit, I've got the insurance policy, just fill out a form and you can have your money back. We're starting to see the emergence of insurance policies that are intended to cover these kinds of losses. But they too are limited. Here's some things to look for if you're going to get insurance against these kinds of losses. Make sure that there aren't too many exceptions. The biggest exception you should be watching out for is criminal prosecution. You should always be on the lookout for that exception, or that stipulation, I should say, that, oh yeah, you'll be able to recover your funds, you'll be able to recover any misdirected wires or anything like that, but there's a few conditions, and one of them is that there be a criminal prosecution. Here's the bad news. There won't be one if you wire $100,000 to Ghana, or Cyprus, or Istanbul, or Russia, or Moscow. There won't be a prosecution. If you're in Salem, New Hampshire, the Salem police aren't going to be prosecuting. You call the FBI, you're not going to get a call back. The numbers are too small. There's nobody to prosecute. You can only prosecute if you can get a defendant. They'll never prosecute because they'll never find a defendant. By the time they finally get through all the bureaucracy, go through the embassy, get the court order, and get to the bank is going to pull up a file. They're going to see that $100,000 landed in an account, that somebody with a false ID or an alias or a fake name went in, withdrew the money, and closed the account. They might have some grainy black and white picture on a bank security camera, and that's it. So if you think that there's going to be a prosecution, you're kidding yourself. And if your insurance requires a prosecution for you to recover, then you won't recover. So look these insurance policies over very carefully and make sure that you're not throwing your money away. There's a lot more that I could say. And these scams have been twisted and turned. I read about a scam in New York City where the chain of communications was intercepted, and the buyers of an expensive property in New York City were supposed to wire money to their attorney. Somehow, I don't want to make any accusations about who got hacked, somebody got hacked. And as a result of somebody getting hacked, these buyers were tricked into sending their money to criminals overseas. And they were fortunate. They were actually able to recover a good amount of their money, which shocked me. They were, and I think they got it from the bank. I don't know how much of that money they were actually able to pull back from the overseas accounts. Again, these accounts that this money is going to, these are not accounts these banks aren't located in countries that have normalized relations with the United States. Many of these countries are rogue countries, countries that have gone off-grid, countries that don't have banking relationships and treaties with the United States. So there are some limited measures that can be taken, but again, by the time the paperwork gets signed and the embassy gets called in and all the bureaucracy and red tape gets navigated, I guarantee you that money will be long gone. So don't be a victim of this scheme. The real estate economy has been the killing fields for this one because we are so busy. And another thing that has made us very vulnerable in real estate is we are very customer service oriented. When I get an email from a seller who desperately wants to have their money wired to a different account because their accountant told them to, because their lawyer told them to, before I even get into the possibility of fraud or is it a trick, I want to make that customer happy. That's how it is in real estate. We try to make people happy so we can attract more business. We try to make people happy so we can attract more transactions. That's the secret of success in real estate. You talk to anybody in real estate who's successful, whether it's a lawyer, a realtor, a loan officer, an appraiser, a home inspector, on some level, they have built their business around delivering good results to satisfied customers. And those satisfied customers, through repeat business or word of mouth or positive reviews on the internet, generate return business. And the unlucky ones in this business, if it is being unlucky, that don't come through for their clients and don't leave people feeling satisfied, their businesses basically dry up. So when somebody calls me on a Friday and they desperately want their money wired, my first instinct is to do it because I want them to be happy. But that can't be your first instinct. Your first instinct needs to be, is that person real? Is that email real? Is that account real? Is that email address real? Is any of it real? Or is it a hoax? Most of us in the real estate business are already hip to this scheme. If you are a real estate practitioner watching this video and you're not, then I am thrilled that you elected to watch this video because you may have saved yourself a big headache, or maybe somebody you know. But if you are anybody in the United States being asked to send money by wire transfer to anybody else, you need to be extremely careful. You need to conduct due diligence. You need to get on the phone with whoever you're supposed to be sending the money to and make sure you're sending the money to the right person. This video has been way longer than I thought it would be, but the subject matter is so important that I think it's justified, and I hope you've taken the time to watch it. And again, I think I probably have had a different persona in this video. I'm usually trying to be very happy and very upbeat and very positive, which is my true nature, but I can't be jolly and lighthearted and discuss this material at the same time. Because basically what's happening out there is lawyers and title people are running around like crazy people, trying to make people happy, doing 100 closings a week, missing out on time with their families, killing themselves to try to make a decent living in the real estate business. And through one false step, they're sending a year's worth of profits or 5 years worth of profits overseas into the bank account of a drug dealer or a smuggler or a terrorist. But regardless of what they are, they're criminals. They're stealing money from the United States. They're thieves. That's what they are. So it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to see people working their butts off to make a living. And then in an effort to make a customer happy, which is what they think they're doing, they basically send money to Ghana, and that money basically just disappears. But it doesn't disappear, of course. It just winds up in the wrong hands and probably utilized for some illegal or illicit purpose. So don't be a victim of this scam. It's too cruel, it's too awful, and it's too easy to be a victim of it because these criminals know our system. They know the way we roll. They know that we do emails. We don't call. We don't pick up the phone. They know that we get busy and overworked, and so we don't double check things the way we should be double checking things. And they know that it should be perpetrated on a Friday, and especially the Friday before a holiday weekend. The one time that we had a legitimate attack on our firm, it was the Friday before Easter. So that fits the pattern of the scam. So anyway, thank you for watching this video. If you know somebody who is sending a wire transfer, tell them to be careful. There's a lot of criminals out there. There are a lot of scams. There are a lot of schemes. There's a lot of fraud. And there are a lot of people out there that would like to be able to siphon off some of the wealth from our hard work and from our industry in this country. Don't let them do it. Don't let them get away with it. My name is Len Foy. I'm a real estate attorney in Nashua, New Hampshire. If this subject interests you, please call me. My phone number is area code 603-598-4030. My email address is lfoy@foylawoffice.com. We're on the internet, www.foylawoffice.com. I appreciate you watching this video. I can't imagine how long it is. I think it's been really long, but I think it was really worth it for me to make, and I think it's really worth it if you took the time to watch it. Be well, have a wonderful day, and again, I appreciate you taking the time to watch my movie. Thanks. Bye for now.